began without a sound. No explosion, no burst of color. Just a flicker, a faint shift in the night sky that most would never notice. Somewhere in the quiet mountains of Chile, a telescope captured it first. A soft dimming of light, then a sudden return, like the heartbeat of a distant star. But it wasn't a star at all. It was 3I Atlas, an interstellar traveler moving silently through the black. A visitor from beyond our solar system, from a place we can't name. Astronomers had been waiting for this one. They'd seen something like it before. A strange object named Oumuamua. That one came and went too quickly, leaving more questions than answers. But this time, the sky had given them another chance. Across the world, observatories turned their gaze toward the same patch of darkness. Hawaii, the Canary Islands, Chile, Australia, all watching the same drifting light. Thlans was on approach to the Sun, heading for its perihelion, the closest point in its orbit. Models were made. Predictions were written. Everything seemed calm, logical, ordinary. Its speed matched expectations. Its trajectory followed the math. Even its initial brightness fit the curve perfectly, until it didn't. The first anomaly appeared as a whisper, a faint irregularity in the data, a dip, then a spike, a brightness that changed just a little too fast. Astronomers adjusted their instruments. They recalibrated, cleaned lenses, checked timestamps. But the flicker persisted. When light behaves unpredictably in space, something is always wrong. Because in astronomy, light is truth. It carries the fingerprints of everything: heat, motion, distance, even composition. And when truth starts to bend, something extraordinary is happening. The next night, the flicker grew stronger. What was once a subtle pulse was now visible across multiple observatories. It wasn't random. It was rhythmic. Every few hours, the light would rise, hold steady, and fade again, like a heartbeat, like a pulse. To the naked eye, it was just a dot among millions. But to those watching through precision optics, it was a mystery unraveling in real time. At Mauna Kea, data analysts stared at the light curve, a simple graph showing brightness over time. They'd plotted thousands of such curves before. Each comet, asteroid, and fragment followed the same gentle slope. But this one looked different. It wasn't smooth. It jumped, tiny bursts of brightness, like Morse code etched into the black. Some thought it was a software glitch. Others blamed atmosphere interference. But when the same pattern appeared in Spain, then South Africa, and then Japan, the silence deepened. On social media, amateur astronomers started comparing notes. "Is anyone else seeing this?" one asked. "Why is it pulsing every 4 hours?" Another wrote. Rumors spread fast. Some said it was rotating mirrors, a surface reflecting sunlight in precise intervals. Others suggested internal heating or chemical eruptions beneath the crust. But one question began to rise louder than the rest. What if it isn't natural? Scientists hate that question, because it doesn't belong in a lab. It belongs in late-night conversations, in the margins of research papers that never get published. Still, the data refused to behave. Infrared readings showed inconsistent temperatures, too hot at times when it should be cooling, too cold when it should be baking under sunlight. It was as if something inside the object was regulating its own heat, a living system or a controlled one. By the second week, the world's major space agencies were watching closely. The European Southern Observatory confirmed the pattern. NASA's data hinted at geometric shifts in reflectivity, angles that seemed designed. The surface appeared to turn, reflect, and align, almost like a structure, as if parts of it were moving intentionally, directing sunlight away. One physicist quietly called it the blink, because every few hours, the object seemed to look, and then look away. But here's the strange part. During those moments when the light dimmed, radio telescopes recorded absolute silence. Not just the usual static of cosmic background noise, but pure mathematical absence. A gap, like someone had cut a frequency clean out of existence. And then, just once, there was a tone. Short, sharp, like the echo of something alive. The scientists didn't announce it. They didn't dare, because if that tone meant anything at all, it would change everything we know about isolation in the universe. As the object neared the sun, its behavior became impossible to ignore. At perihelion, comets usually brighten. Sunlight vaporizes ice, forming brilliant tails. But 3i Atlas didn't follow that rule. It didn't brighten. It pulsed, each flash now stronger, timed, deliberate. Every light surge matched the same internal rhythm, identical intervals measured across continents. And when plotted together, those intervals formed something astonishing. A repeating mathematical ratio, the golden sequence. A pattern woven into art, music, and even human DNA coincidence. Or communication? By now, the story had leaked. An online astronomy forum published snippets of the light curve, and people began speculating. Videos, theories, late-night talk shows. Everyone wanted to know what was happening near the sun, but the professionals stayed quiet, because they still didn't understand it, and they feared what it might mean. The object's orbit held steady, but its energy signature kept shifting. One NASA engineer described it perfectly. It's like watching a machine pretending to be a rock. Night after night, 3i Atlas drew closer to the sun, closer to truth, closer to whatever secret it carried. In the control rooms, tension hung thick in the air. People stopped talking. They just watched the monitors. Each flicker, each burst, each silent interval. They weren't just looking at a comet anymore. They were looking at a possibility that something out there was watching back. On the eve of perihelion, the object reached its brightest point. Every telescope was aimed, every sensor running, and then, just as the sun's light should have made it blaze, it dimmed, completely. For 37 seconds, the signal vanished. Every instrument went blind, and when it returned, the brightness had changed. The light curve didn't match any known model. It was cleaner, smoother, like it had shed something, or completed a cycle. No one could explain it. No one could even agree if it was still the same object. Around the world, scientists refreshed their screens, waiting for new data to load. But for a moment, a long, breathless moment, nothing happened. Just a blank feed, a frozen sky, the waiting sky. In that silence, one thought lingered among them all. Maybe we were never meant to find this, because sometimes discovery doesn't feel like victory. It feels like being seen, and as 3i Atlas curved around the sun, leaving behind only a flickering trace of light, the question no one dared to ask grew louder in the dark. Why was the light flickering before it even reached the sun? At first it was just noise, a hum, a flicker, the kind of interference scientists learn to ignore. Telescopes catch strange signals all the time. Solar flares, background radiation, the hiss of cosmic dust. It's part of the job, static in the stream. No reason to look twice, but this time, someone did. It came from a quiet lab in the Australian outback. A research assistant, barely out of grad school, noticed something strange buried in the light data. Every few hours. The same blip. Not random, not fading, but steady, deliberate. She flagged it, ran the numbers again, and there it was, like a hidden drumbeat beneath the silence. A pulse. At first, they thought it was local interference. Maybe a satellite, maybe a relay tower nearby. But then the same pulse was found, in Spain and again in Hawaii. Different instruments, different teams, different continents, same rhythm, same exact timing. The beat wasn't loud. It didn't shout. It whispered. But the whisper was so precise, so clean, that it couldn't be natural. There were no random gaps, no jitter, no fading out, just a signal that kept coming back, like someone or something was keeping time. Scientists don't use the word impossible lightly, but this was getting close. Objects from deep space shouldn't pulse like this. Not comets, not asteroids, not interstellar debris. They tumble, they glow, they decay, but they don't speak. One lab fed the data into a sound synthesizer. They wanted to hear the pulse's sound, to make the numbers feel real, and when they played it back, a chill filled the room. It sounded like a heartbeat, slow, mechanical, then silent. And then again, thump, wait, thump, the sound of something alive, or the rhythm of something ancient. Not chaos, not nature, intention. And that scared people more than they were willing to admit. The pattern wasn't just repeating, it was evolving. Every few days, a new layer would appear, a secondary pulse beneath the first, then a third, interference. Maybe, but when plotted visually, the pulses aligned into a spiral, a waveform that mirrored something eerily familiar. The Fibonacci sequence, the same ratio found in galaxies. Seashells, DNA nature's favorite number, echoing out from an object near the sun. It didn't make sense. Why would a comet flicker in perfect golden ratio? Why would an icy rock match the mathematics of life? Theories began to form, slowly, quietly. One researcher suggested it was a rotating object with light-reflective panels. Another said it could be a natural lensing effect, gravity bending light in a repeating loop. But those explanations didn't hold. The pulse wasn't just light. Radio telescopes were now picking up the same rhythm in electromagnetic bursts, light, heat, sound, all pulsing together. Different instruments, same message. A global meeting was called. Scientists from 7 nations logged into the same encrypted channel. No media, no press, no public report. They were trying to figure out what they were listening to and whether they were the listeners or the ones being heard. One question hung in the air like a weight. What if this isn't a comet? Not ice, not dust, not debris from a dead star, but something built, something designed. A probe, a relic, a beacon. They reviewed the motion data again. 3I Atlas was still on course. Its orbit was stable, its velocity unchanged, but the behavior didn't belong, and neither did the sound. Audio engineers ran the pulse through different frequency bands. At one point, they slowed it down to human tempo. What came out didn't sound random. It sounded like a signal, call and response, a structure of sound, not speech, not language, but something meant to be noticed. And then, the most chilling part. In one lab, a technician noticed a silence between pulses. Not nothing. A gap, always the same length, always the same pause. And in that pause, a frequency dead zone. Something was removing all signal, scrubbing it clean. Nature doesn't do that. Nature is messy, chaotic, wild. This was surgical. Suddenly, people weren't just watching a comet, they were watching a performance, an object that didn't just travel, it announced itself. And for the first time, the idea became unavoidable. This wasn't just a rock drifting through space. This was a presence. People began whispering theories that had no place in science journals, that the pulse was a test, that the object was watching for reactions, that we had triggered something by noticing it. And in the middle of that speculation, the pulse changed. It was subtle, but clear. The beat shifted, a half-second longer, just once, then back to normal, a single hiccup, as if the sender had paused to listen. That night, 3 different observatories reported the same anomaly. The pulse had echoed, not just transmitted, but reflected, like a sonar ping, bouncing off something nearby, something invisible. Could it be solar interference? Gravitational lensing, possibly, but unlikely, because the echo came from a direction it shouldn't, a zone between planets, cold, empty space, where there's nothing, where there's no one. And yet, the pulse bounced back. The mystery was growing. This wasn't just science anymore. It was something deeper, something that made the hair rise on the back of your neck. Because when you realize a message has a pattern, you have to ask who's writing it. And if it changes when you observe it, you have to ask who's watching you. One astrophysicist finally said it out loud. This feels like intelligence, not coincidence. And in the silence that followed, no one disagreed. As the object moved closer to the sun, the pulse continued. Steady, persistent, alive. But what was it counting down to? A contact, a reveal, a return, or something we don't even have a word for yet? Is this the beat of a machine, or the whisper of something older? At first, it looked like a glitch, a calibration error, just numbers on a screen that didn't make sense. The object, 3I Atlas, had finally drawn close enough to the sun for infrared scans to pick up more than light. They were now reading heat, or at least, they were trying to, because the numbers coming back, they didn't follow the rules. In daylight, It was cold, unnaturally cold, not just under expectations, but below what physics predicted, and in shadow, where it should have been freezing. It was hot, hotter than it had any right to be, hotter than the side facing the sun. Satellites from 3 different agencies reported the same data, from different angles, different sensors. But the readings lined up. Temperatures fluctuating in a pattern. Not random spikes, not natural gradients, but structured intervals. The surface wasn't behaving like ice or rock. It was acting like insulation, one layer absorbing heat, another releasing it, and then reversing, like it was cycling, like it was breathing. Scientists tried to explain it away. Some said it could be outgassing, frozen gases inside the object heating up, then venting into space, a known phenomenon. But the heat curve didn't match outgassing behavior. It was too smooth, too consistent, too timed. Someone else suggested internal heating, maybe radioactive decay. But that didn't fit either, because decay is constant, and this wasn't. The object warmed and cooled like it wanted to. Infrared images showed heat blooming in shapes, not blobs, not fractures, but bands, thermal rings, wrapping around the object's body. Even stranger, the rings would shift position every few hours, from the poles to the equator, from left to right, like someone was rotating the heat. One thermal engineer quietly whispered what everyone else was thinking. "This looks artificial." And just like that, the room went quiet. Because that word, artificial, doesn't belong in natural science. It belongs in design, in intention. And if this object was managing its own temperature, if it was controlling heat like a system instead of a surface, then it wasn't a comet. It was something else. One night, the object passed through a stretch of space between Earth and Mercury, a region of intense solar radiation. It should have flared. It should have boiled. Even solid rock would show signs of thermal strain. But 3I Atlas stayed steady, smooth, unchanged. The heat barely fluctuated, as if it absorbed the blast and kept moving. Imagine an object shrugging off the heat of a star. That's what they were watching. The thermal sensors became more sensitive. High-resolution scans were run every hour, and that's when the patterns became undeniable. Temperatures across the surface shifted, not just by position, but by time. Specific regions warmed at exact intervals, 6 hours apart, like clockwork, and then cooled, in reverse order. It wasn't just regulating heat, it was cycling it, like a circuit, or a heart. For a moment, the data suggested something even more bizarre, that the object's core was colder than its shell, colder than the vacuum of space, an internal void, where no heat reached, no energy, no movement, a thermal silence. This wasn't how natural bodies behaved. Comets and rocks don't have cold centers and moving heat belts. They just heat up, break apart, and fade. But this one was still whole, still strong, still calm. More simulations were run. What if the object had internal shielding, a layered hull? What if it wasn't a comet at all, but a capsule, a vessel? Suddenly, scientists weren't just looking at temperature maps. They were looking at architecture, an outer layer designed to absorb light, an inner layer that remained untouched. The question now wasn't what it was why. Why regulate heat so perfectly? Why protect the inside so aggressively? What was inside? Thermal satellite imagery showed the most dramatic pattern yet, a rotating spiral of warmth, not static, spinning, pulsing. It looked almost organic, like the blooming of a flower or the slow turn of a storm. And then it stopped. The spiral vanished, replaced by silence. The heat signatures went blank. No warning, no transition, just off. For 10 hours, the object went thermally dark. Every sensor read 0 change. Flat lines, And then, at dawn over South America, the heat returned. But different. Now it wasn't spirals. It was a grid. Sharp, geometric blocks, like panels on a machine, all heating in sequence, all perfectly timed. This wasn't chaos. It was choreography, an unfolding dance of energy, structured, repeating, elegant, not nature, not chance, something else. The question now spread far beyond scientists. Military agencies began requesting classified infrared scans. Private contractors offered AI analysis of the heat shifts. Some even tried to model how it would look from the inside. But none of it made sense, because every time you thought you'd found the pattern, it changed, slightly, subtly, like it knew, like it was listening. Could a natural object adapt like this? Could it respond to radiation in real time? Could it hide and reveal thermal signals like a message, or worse, like a test? The whispers returned, that it was watching us, that it had been engineered, that it wasn't here by chance and somewhere in that cold, mathematical silence. One thought took root, a thought so heavy, no one wanted to say it out loud. What if the heat wasn't the mystery? What if the heat was a lock and the object hadn't opened yet? Could this object be controlling its own heat? Or is it waiting to be let in? At first glance, the object still looked the same. Just a distant speck of light, drifting across the sky. A glowing dot, growing brighter as it neared the sun. But now, astronomers weren't just watching the light. They were watching how it reflected. And that was where things got strange. Every natural object reflects sunlight differently. Rocks scatter it, ice refracts it, dust diffuses it into a soft, fading glow. But 3i Atlas, it was doing something else. It wasn't just reflecting light, it was aiming it. Telescopes began to pick up sharp fluctuations in brightness. Not soft, not smooth, but sudden, precise, geometric. The data didn't lie. Every 6 hours, the object's brightness would spike, then drop, then spike again. Exactly the same amount. A mirror couldn't even reflect that perfectly. But this wasn't just reflection. It was redirection, like something turning in slow motion, catching the sun at just the right angle, and flashing. Some called them mirror events. Moments when the object seemed to tilt, as if exposing a flat, reflective surface to the sun. Each flash lasted seconds, but they were too clean to be random, too symmetrical to be natural. Engineers simulated it. They tried building digital models to match the reflection pattern. No sphere, no jagged asteroid, no tumbling rock could reproduce it. Only panels, flat, smooth, angled just right. They began to suspect the unthinkable. This object had facets, like a cut gem, or a machine. Further analysis showed something even more bizarre. The flashes followed a path, not just on the object, but in space. Over several days, each reflective spike traced a curve, a helix spiraling outward, like a signal, not in sound, but in light. One physicist described it like this: it's not just reflecting light, it's sending a message through brightness, a Morse code of the sun, blinding, silent, unmistakable. The object's surface was behaving like it had memory, turning specific sides toward Earth, then shifting, then returning, again and again. It was choosing when and where to flash, and when no one was looking, it stopped. One night, an observatory in Chile missed its window due to weather. No data was recorded for 6 hours, and during that exact gap, there were no flashes, none at all, as if the object had gone dark. On purpose, but when observation resumed, the flashes returned. Same pattern, same angles. Like it knew, scientists stared at their screens in disbelief. Brightness events timed to human observation. What kind of rock does that? What kind of object responds to being watched? There was more. The spectral analysis showed unusual spikes during the flashes, signatures that didn't match any known mineral. The reflectivity was near perfect, too perfect. Some surfaces on the object had zero scatter, meaning light bounced off clean, like from polished chrome. But comets don't have chrome. They don't have polish. They don't have design, so what material was this? What kind of surface could control light that precisely? Advanced carbon composites? Metallic lattices? Photonic crystals? Nothing in our solar system behaves this way. Not naturally. Military satellites began pointing toward the object now. Quietly. Privately. Because something that can control light can also hide, and something that hides can also see. Questions began to pile up. Was this object reflecting light? Or collecting it? Was it trying to power something? Charge a system? Communicate? Or was it scanning? Looking back? Learning how we see? Reflectivity is a choice. You either shine or absorb. But this object was doing both. On a schedule, bright one moment, dark the next. The duality was too elegant, too precise. What's more, the angles of reflection weren't random. When plotted, they created a pattern, a geometric spiral that followed the path of the sun. The flashes always occurred off-axis from Earth, then swept back toward us, like a rotating dish, or a scanning beam. And the timing? It lined up with Earth's rotation, as if it was trying to stay in sync with us. Not with the sun, not with space, with us. That's when someone asked the question out loud, is this a mirror or an eye? The idea spread fast, that the object might not be just reflecting, but watching. That each flash wasn't an accident, but a frame, and that the data we thought we were collecting was being collected about us. In secret briefings, governments discussed possibilities. If it was built, who built it? If it was watching, why now, why here? Why this moment in history? Maybe it had passed by before. Maybe it had visited countless star systems. Maybe it only responded to civilizations that could see it. And now, we could. The reflective flashes kept coming, even brighter, even more structured. Some now appeared in exact mathematical ratios, golden angles, prime intervals, fractal patterns, like a cosmic kaleidoscope. But with rules. It didn't feel random anymore. It felt choreographed, like something was saying, you're not alone. You're being seen. The reflectivity changed again. A new layer of complexity. Flashes now alternated in color. Slight shifts in wavelength, cooler, then warmer, like the flicker of a film reel. Some called it an optical language, others a warning, because light this controlled, this intelligent, isn't passive, it's active. A final question lingered over every observatory. What kind of material behaves like this? And why now? Why reveal this pattern at this point in our history? And what happens when the lights go out? You'd expect space to be quiet. After all, there's no air, no sound, just the cold, endless dark. But space isn't silent. Not really. It hums. It crackles. It sings in radiation and waves. Stars hiss, pulsars blink. Gas clouds whisper static across the cosmos. To those who listen, space is alive with sound. Even if it's not a sound we can hear. That's why this was wrong, not quiet. Not static, but a hollow surgical absence. In the radio bands where 3i Atlas drifted, there was nothing, not background noise, not solar bounce, not even the soft hiss of interplanetary dust. Just a clean, impossible void. It was as if someone had erased the frequency, cut it out, like slicing silence into the air, and then came the tone. Short, sharp, pure. It lasted just under 2 seconds, and when it ended, the silence returned. Only now, it felt colder. The signal didn't repeat. It didn't echo. It didn't follow up with a burst of information. It just happened, once. And that was enough to stop every conversation in the control room. The team at the Arecibo listening array caught it first. They weren't even scanning for transmissions. They were watching the object's thermal drift. And then, that sound. It was narrow, focused, contained, in a frequency band that just didn't make sense, a band that no natural object should know how to use, and certainly not one that reflects light in spirals. So, what was it? Not a burst of energy, not a malfunction. It was a tone, pure, intentional, like the key of a piano pressed slowly and let go. Other stations scrambled to confirm, and they did. Japan, Canada, South Africa, different receivers, different equipment, same sound, same time. Exactly 2 seconds past 0314 UTC, there was no delay, no drift from distance, meaning it wasn't coming from deep space, it was local, very local, from 3i Atlas itself. Scientists ran through the usual suspects. Could it be from Earth? Interference? A rogue signal bouncing off the ionosphere? No. The data was too clean, too precise. It didn't bend. It didn't scatter. It cut through the void like a scalpel. They ran the waveform through audio filters, and what emerged was unsettling. It wasn't a natural tone, not a sine wave, not a thermal echo. It had shape, beginning, middle, end, like punctuation, like a single word with no language, and then, as quickly as it appeared, it was gone. The object remained, the reflectivity still flashed, the heat cycle still pulsed, but the frequency band, still empty, still, clean. One physicist called it active silence, not a lack of sound, but the presence of suppression. Something, or someone, was keeping the airwaves blank. And when it chose to speak, it did so only once. More theories flooded in. Maybe the tone was a signature, a cosmic idea handshake, or worse, a trigger. Was it a signal or a warning? No one knew. But everyone had a theory. Some claimed it was like a sonar ping, bouncing off planets, waiting to hear a return. Others said it was a broadcast challenge, a way to see who's listening, to see who responds. One astrophysicist offered a darker theory. Maybe it was a doorbell, a way of saying, "We've arrived." Then came the chills. Teams replayed the signal at different speeds. And one version, slowed down 100x, sounded familiar, not like a word, not like a voice, but like a tone humans have heard before. Somewhere buried deep in the subconscious, like a bell in the fog. A childhood memory you can't quite place. It didn't feel alien. It felt ancient, and that terrified people even more. The military wanted answers. Private labs were called in, spectral analysis, phase breakdown, even musical theory. Everything pointed to one thing. This sound should not exist. It didn't match the composition of the object. It didn't reflect from the sun. It came from within, and it came on a frequency that suggested encryption. That meant structure, encoding, a message, even if we couldn't decode it. Meanwhile, the absence continued. For days after the tone, the frequency band remained scrubbed, clean, no radiation, no bleed over, no cosmic noise, like a wall had been raised, a bubble of quiet, not accidental, not technical, but protective. You could stare at it for hours, the flat line, the void, the unnatural stillness of space that once buzzed with life. It felt like standing in a dark room after a voice has spoken, and knowing it might still be listening. So the question grew louder. Was that a signal? A hello, or was it a test? A check-in, or worse? A countdown? Others believed it was something far more poetic, a marker. A sound designed not to be understood, but to be felt. An echo from something older than language, older than memory, older than fear. And just when people began to doubt they had heard anything at all, the tone returned, but not from the object. This time, it came from behind it, from a point deeper in space, colder, darker, a faint echo, the same tone, reversed, like a call, and an answer. But between them, still that silence, that strange surgical absence, that void where something should be. In the end, it left only one question. If silence is a choice, then what are they waiting for us to say? By now, scientists had grown used to being surprised by 3i Atlas. The pulse, the heat, the strange reflective flashes. But this time, it broke something bigger. It broke the laws we thought governed motion itself. For weeks, its orbit had matched every simulation, a long arc sweeping in from the edge of the solar system, approaching the sun in a wide, slow curve, just like any interstellar object would. No engine, no push, just gravity, doing its quiet work. It was predictable, comforting even, the one thing they could rely on until they couldn't. Just days before perihelion, the trajectory shifted. Not a wobble, not a nudge, but a veer, a deliberate, silent correction. The object moved off the ecliptic, the plane where planets orbit. It tilted upwards slightly at first, then faster, like a car slowly drifting off the highway, leaving the map behind. Every computer model failed. The trajectory didn't match comet behavior, didn't match gravity wells, didn't even match known anomalies. It was accelerating, but not falling, being pushed. That's when the whispers began again. What's moving it? What force can change an object's orbit? Without leaving a trace? No jets, no outgassing, no tail, nothing that would suggest propulsion. And yet, there it was, speeding up, climbing, turning. Some said it was solar radiation, that the object had massive reflective panels using sunlight to steer. But that theory cracked within hours. The angles were all wrong. The acceleration was too smooth, and more importantly, It only happened when no one was watching. The night sky hid many things, but even in darkness, the math doesn't lie. Telemetry showed the object speeding up while outside Earth's line of sight, as if it waited for that moment. And then, once eyes were back on it, it coasted, steady, stable, like it had nothing to hide. A new theory emerged, that it wasn't just being moved, it was navigating. This shook the room. Objects don't navigate, they obey gravity. They follow paths written by physics and time. But this one had a will. It chose when to turn, chose when to rise, chose not to stay in line. Astronomers tried to predict where it was going, but the math didn't help. There was no parabolic curve, no hyperbolic exit trajectory, just a new path, one that didn't point toward deep space, but toward something else. It was still within the solar system, still threading between planets, but now it was climbing out of the ecliptic plane, toward a part of space we don't study often, a quiet sector, sparse, dim, almost forgotten. Why there? What was out there? It wasn't a known star, not a gravitational target, just emptiness. But maybe that's what it wanted, to go unnoticed, to slip past the sun unseen, and vanish into the dark. One physicist said something chilling. It's not returning to where it came from. It's heading to where it belongs next. Meanwhile, planetary defense systems flagged the orbit change as an unscheduled maneuver, a classification usually reserved for satellites, not cosmic visitors. They were calling it a maneuver now, not a drift, not a glitch, but a decision. And that word changed everything, because a decision means intelligence, and intelligence means origin, not random, not ancient, but recent, present, alive. The object's new path brought it dangerously close to Mars' orbital corridor. For a few hours it looked like it might intersect. Panic swept through defense networks. Simulations ran millions of outcomes, and then, just before the window, the object dipped, perfectly, avoiding the corridor by mere kilometers. Too close to be chance, too clean to be luck. This wasn't debris, it wasn't a rogue fragment. It was navigating obstacles, like it knew where they were, like it had a map, or had been here before. The data became more unsettling. The acceleration wasn't even. It surged in brief intervals, tiny boosts, invisible, untraceable. No thermal signatures, no propulsion trails, just motion, then stillness, then motion again. Exactly the pattern a controlled craft would use. Some speculated advanced propulsion, gravitational manipulation, even inertia dampening, ideas pulled from science fiction. But the truth was simpler and more terrifying. We didn't know. We had no idea what was moving it, only that it wasn't gravity, and it wasn't random. The object was now outside the predicted window, beyond perihelion, past every model they had built. It was writing its own path, and for the first time, we weren't tracking it, we were chasing it. Because if this wasn't a mistake, if this course change was planned, then it had a destination, one that wasn't on any of our maps. And that raised the final question: what force is steering it? And where is it going? At first, the light just flickered, then it pulsed, then it moved. Now, it speaks not in words, not in sounds, but in patterns. Mathematical, deliberate, familiar. The deeper astronomers dove into the data from 3i Atlas, the stranger it became. But this time, it wasn't chaos they found, it was order, and that was even more unsettling. A young astrophysicist noticed it first. A graduate student analyzing the most recent light curve data. She wasn't looking for meaning, she was just plotting the brightness. But something stopped her, a rhythm, a shape she'd seen before. Not in the sky, but in a textbook, a spiral, a golden one, the kind found in hurricanes, pine cones, and the curve of a nautilus shell. She ran the numbers again and again. The same spiral repeated across multiple segments of the data, each flash from 3i Atlas tracing the outline of a Fibonacci sequence. 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13. Not just in timing, but in brightness, a growing pattern, a sequence, with structure. And suddenly, the team realized something profound. They weren't just observing a light curve anymore, they were watching a message unfold. Scientists began to overlay the signal with ancient mathematical templates, the golden ratio, phi, prime sequences, and one after another, they fit too closely, too perfectly. This wasn't a natural curve. It was composed, like music. It felt almost human, because these patterns weren't random discoveries. They were things we had named, things woven into our architecture. our art, even our DNA. Why would an object from deep space use a language we understand? Unless it's not coincidence. Unless it's intentional. Engineers compared the light fluctuations to binary code, and the results were astonishing. For bright, 0 for dim, mapped out, the intervals translated into repeating segments. Structured, non-random, symmetrical, and in one sequence, a repeating palindrome. A pattern that read the same forward and backward. Nature doesn't do that. Not like this, but machines do. Signals do. People do. Now the question wasn't whether the object was intelligent, it was whether it was speaking, and if so, were we supposed to respond? Historians were pulled into the conversation. Linguists, anthropologists, not to translate the message, but to recognize it. To ask if these shapes, these curves, meant something to us for a reason. And the answer was disturbing. These weren't just patterns. They were echoes of what we once built, once believed, once worshipped. The golden ratio appears in the Great Pyramids, in Da Vinci's sketches, in spiral galaxies and sunflower seeds. It is, some say, the geometry of truth, the universal constant of beauty and balance. And now, 3i Atlas was using it not just once, but over and over, in light, in heat, even in its strange orbit. The angles matched Fibonacci intervals. The dips mirrored fractal scaling. It was layered, as if something out there wasn't just signaling us. It was studying us, mirroring us. That idea chilled the room. What if 3i Atlas wasn't random? What if it had been watching Earth? For a long time, gathering, learning, understanding how we think, and now, finally speaking in our own language. One cryptographer put it like this. It's not sending a message we can decode. It's sending one we already know. But why Fibonacci? Why golden spirals? Why patterns that feel ancient, almost sacred? Some believe it's because math is the one true constant, that any intelligent species would discover the same principles, the same ratios, the same truths, but others see something deeper, not just intelligence, but familiarity. This wasn't just a universal signal, it was a tailored one, meant for us. At this moment, in this century, a few began to whisper something no one wanted to say. We've seen these patterns before, in crop circles, in ancient texts, in forgotten architecture, not exact matches, but echoes, hints, like breadcrumbs scattered across history, waiting to be understood. Was 3i Atlas trying to remind us of something? To reactivate something we once knew and forgot? The patterns grew more complex. Now the pulses weren't just golden intervals, they were nested. Patterns inside patterns, like a code inside a code, like a signature. And in one transmission, the pattern inverted. The spiral collapsed, reset, almost like an erasure, and then started over. From the beginning, who or what sends a message and erases it in front of you, unless it's waiting for you to notice the mistake, to prove you're watching, to prove you're ready. In the stillness of the observatory, one voice broke the silence. If this is a machine, then it's speaking in mathematics. And if it's not a machine, then it's something much, much older. Because the golden ratio isn't just science. It's mythology. It's the spiral of creation, the curve of galaxies and seashells, the fingerprint of life itself. What kind of intelligence chooses that to say hello? What kind of being hides messages in the building blocks of the universe? Scientists were no longer arguing about the reality of the patterns. They were arguing about intent. Was it trying to guide us, warn us, activate us? Or was it just watching to see if we'd understand? And behind every whispered theory, every sleepless night, one question burned hotter than the rest. Is someone, or something, using the language of science to speak? And if so, what comes next? It started as a whisper, a draft, unpublished, unsigned, passed quietly between observatories, between labs, between those who had seen enough, and could no longer explain it away. A simple PDF, no title page. No author, just a question. What if it's not natural, and never was? It wasn't a formal announcement. It wasn't peer-reviewed. It wasn't even official. But it said what everyone else had been too afraid to write. That 3i Atlas, this flickering, pulsing, heat-cycling object, wasn't behaving like anything from the natural world. It was regulating. It was adapting. It was choosing. The paper laid it out line by line, the self-stabilizing temperature zones, the light curves that matched mathematical design, the strange orbit correction that defied all known forces, the absence of natural chaos, the presence of symmetry, and the way it always seemed to respond. No comet behaves this way. No asteroid maintains geometric reflectivity. while shifting its spin, and certainly no rock from deep space emits a singular tone. In a wiped frequency band, this wasn't an object anymore. It was something else. Some called it a probe, sent to observe, to learn, to test. Others had a different idea, that it was a mirror, not a device to send messages, but one that shows us who we are, reflecting our questions, mimicking our math, bending light to match our models. Just enough, and then breaking them. The paper didn't name it directly. It didn't say alien. It didn't say artificial. But it didn't have to. The language was clear. Self-regulation, directional intention, orbital autonomy. These aren't the words of geology. They're the words of engineering. The response was immediate. Some denied it outright, called it fiction, sensationalism, but others just stayed quiet, because deep down, they'd already seen it too. They'd seen the heat spirals, the pulsing Fibonacci patterns, the orbit that corrected itself while no one was watching. They'd seen a machine. But if this was a machine, then what was it for? What was it doing here? Was it studying us? Was it sending data home? Was it waiting for something? Or was it broken, drifting, lonely, decaying, while still performing its final instructions? Some began to ask, what if this wasn't the first one? What if others had passed by, unnoticed, unexplained, misclassified as comets? We see thousands of small bodies each year. Most disappear, some burn. A few break apart. What if one of them wasn't a mistake? There's a theory in astrophysics called the Bracewell probe hypothesis. The idea that an advanced civilization wouldn't send a signal across the stars. It would send a machine, a quiet traveler, designed to wait, to listen, to respond only when intelligence was detected. A cosmic ambassador, or a sleeper, and suddenly, 3I Atlas looked a lot like that. One section of the paper explored its outer structure, the mirrored surfaces, the near-perfect reflectivity, the way it controlled exposure to sunlight. That isn't random geology. That's adaptive shielding, like heat tiles on a spacecraft, like insulation on a vessel made to pass through stars. Then there was the silence, the surgical absence in the radio band. No background radiation, no signal scatter. It wasn't just empty. It was wiped, active suppression, like a mute button held down, until it wasn't. And then came the tone. A tone that didn't repeat, didn't explain itself, didn't ask for a response. It simply existed, like a key waiting for a door. And if this was a probe, or a mirror, what was it looking for? What was it measuring? Some suggested our reaction, the way we mobilized, the way we studied, speculated, feared. Others believed it was observing our understanding, revealing complexity in stages, testing to see if we could follow, if we were ready. But there was another possibility. What if it wasn't here to study us? What if it was here to remind us, to trigger something old, buried, forgotten? The patterns it used were ours. Fibonacci, golden spirals, ratios etched into ancient temples. It wasn't introducing new knowledge. It was echoing what we already knew, or maybe what we used to know, and that's when the paper took its most daring step. It asked, what if this machine didn't come from out there, but from right here, a relic, launched long before our records began, from a civilization that rose and vanished, leaving behind only myths, a machine that was never meant to return, or maybe one that always does. Some dismissed it instantly, too speculative, too fringe, but others couldn't stop thinking about it, because 3I Atlas didn't behave like an invader, or a scout, or a threat. It behaved like a memory, something retracing a path it had taken long ago, responding to the only language we might still understand, math. And if it was a machine, then machines have instructions. Some are triggered by sound, some by time, some by observation, and some by awakening. So the question echoed again, what if it's not natural, and never was? And more importantly, what happens when the machine finishes its task? They say the universe doesn't care whether we're watching, that stars explode in silence, that galaxies spin on, with or without us. But what if something did care? What if the act of looking changed what we saw? It started with a scheduling glitch. A telescope in South Africa went offline for maintenance. 6 hours of darkness. No one watching, no one listening, and in those 6 hours, 3I Atlas went still. No flares, no pulses, no reflective flashes. The heat pattern froze. The light curve flattened. For the first time in days, it behaved like a rock. Then, as soon as observation resumed, the flares returned. Same pattern, same intensity, same timing, like it had been waiting, like it knew. Across the world, similar reports trickled in. Flares appeared only during observation windows, only when data was being actively collected. If a telescope missed its window, no flare, no pulse, no change. At first, it was written off as coincidence, data alignment, timing errors, but the more they compared logs, the more impossible it became to deny it was performing, not constantly, not at random, only when eyes were on it. The realization hit hard. Are we studying it, or is it studying us? There's a phenomenon in quantum physics, the observer effect, where particles behave differently when they're being watched, measured, recorded, noticed. It was always considered a quirk of the microscopic world, too small to matter at scale. But now, something massive was doing the same thing. Imagine an object from deep space, one that listens for the moment it's being seen, and only then begins to act, to flare, to heat, to respond, not because we changed it, but because we revealed ourselves. What kind of intelligence works like that? Not loud, not invasive, but silent, observant, deliberate. One lab ran a test. They scheduled a false observation, a phantom telescope feed. No real data collected. No real eyes watching, just the illusion of presence. And the object did nothing. It didn't flare. It didn't move. It didn't respond. But when the actual observation resumed, so did the activity. That meant it could tell the difference between passive surveillance and real attention, between empty instruments and human intention. It wasn't reacting to light. It was reacting to focus. What kind of machine knows when it's being watched? What kind of system reacts to human curiosity, but stays silent in our absence? Maybe this wasn't science anymore. Maybe this was theater. Because if 3i Atlas changes when we look at it, then it's not just a subject of study, it's part of the conversation. Flares began to sync with major observatories, spiking during high-resolution scans, flattening during low-priority windows. It preferred the big instruments. The bigger the lens, the brighter the response, as if it wanted to be seen clearly, as if it was saying, "Look closer. Come find me." Then came the most haunting pattern of all. On a night when 20 telescopes watched in sync, the object flared in a perfect rhythm. Once every 88 seconds, matching, exactly, the cycle of one of Earth's most powerful radar sweeps, not just random flaring, but mirroring our own scanning systems, like a mimic, like a signal bouncing off a mirror, like something copying us. Now the hypothesis grew darker. What if this isn't the first time it's been seen? What if this object has passed other planets, other civilizations, other eyes? And every time, it learns a little more, learns how to be noticed, how to respond, how to reflect. One scientist called it a reflexive intelligence, not aggressive, not expressive, but reactive. It doesn't reach out first. It waits, and when someone dares to look closely, it shows them just enough. Some believe it's a kind of cosmic test, not for our technology, but for our perception. Are we curious enough, focused enough, unified enough to even notice it's performing? And when we do, what do we learn about ourselves? Because maybe this thing isn't here to tell us anything at all. Maybe it's just a mirror, one that reflects only what we're ready to see. Others believe it's more than that this behavior, this observer effect, is a defense, that it only reveals itself when it's safe, when it detects curiosity, not hostility, when the questions are louder than the fear. That would mean it's not just intelligent, it's cautious, not a scout, not a threat, but a witness. So they tried something. A group of scientists scheduled an unbroken 24-hour observation. No gaps, no shadows, no blind spots, just continuous focused study. And during that window, the object performed not just light curves, not just flares, but a new sequence, one that hadn't been seen before. A triple pulse, then a spiral of heat, then total silence, like punctuation, like a sentence, like an answer. But to what question? In the control room, no one spoke. They just watched the data print out, a stream of symbols they didn't yet understand. But they felt something, an emotion that's hard to explain, like standing in a cathedral, or hearing your name in a dream, familiar, echoing, personal, because the moment we watched it, it watched us back, and in that mutual gaze, one truth began to form. Maybe the universe has always been waiting for someone to look up and notice, and when we finally did, something noticed us too. For weeks, they had watched it move forward, past Mercury, around the sun, then out, toward the edge of our system. But now, they wanted to know where it began. So they did what scientists always do. They reversed the clock. They traced its path backward, frame by frame, light by light, and what they found was silence. It didn't come from a star. It didn't come from a galaxy, not from any charted region where gravity could have flung it our way. It came from nothing. A dark sector, a place without stars, no light, no clusters, no history. Just a cold, silent stretch of space between spiral arms, a place even telescopes rarely look. Astronomers call it an interstellar void, a cosmic desert. Nothing comes from there. No planets, no systems, no origin stories, just coldness, just drift. It's a region that absorbs everything and returns nothing. But that's where the object was born, or at least, where its trail begins. And that raised the question no one had prepared to ask. Did it come from the dark? On purpose. For most objects, tracing an orbit is simple. Comets have arcs. Rogue asteroids have slingshot paths. They come from somewhere. But 3I Atlas had no such origin. It didn't curve. It didn't bounce. It simply appeared. From the black. The simulations offered no comfort. When they ran the object's path in reverse, projecting it millions of years into the past, the line stretched back into a stretch of space that was empty, truly empty, not in a poetic sense, in a literal one. No stars, no clouds, no gravity wells. It was a void so perfect it felt unnatural, like something had carved it out. A blind spot in the universe, a region intentionally blank. One scientist stared at the map and said softly, "This is where the sky goes quiet." So then, what kind of object comes from silence? What kind of intelligence hides its launch point in a place nothing can trace, unless it's been moving for longer than we can imagine? Unless it's been drifting for a very, very long time? Another possibility emerged. What if it didn't come from the void, but was returning to it? What if this wasn't a mission of exploration, but of return? What if 3I Atlas wasn't an arrival, but a homecoming? Some called the void a scar, evidence of a collapsed star system, long gone. Others believed it was a mask, a region cloaked in gravitational distortion, hiding something, a station, a machine, a presence, not a launch point, but a destination. Because when they looked deeper, when they scanned the black with high-frequency imaging, they found something, not a planet, not a ship, not a signal, but a shadow, a faint distortion in the cosmic background radiation, something that shouldn't be there, something that bent the silence and it was in line with the object's new trajectory. That was the final confirmation. 3I Atlas wasn't wandering. It was returning, but returning to what? To who? To a civilization? To a vault? To a mothership buried in dark? Or something deeper? Something not meant to be found? In ancient myths, the void was never just empty. It was sacred. It was origin, a place where creation began, and where everything returns. In physics, it's called the cold spot. In storytelling, it's called home. Maybe this object isn't trying to communicate. Maybe it's not trying to warn us. Maybe it's simply moving, on instinct, following programming, following memory. And we just happen to catch it in transit. A glimpse, a window, a brief flicker of something older than stars. The void holds no answers. No history, only silence. And now a single object moving into that silence with quiet purpose. One astronomer whispered something no one forgot. We're not watching it leave us. We're watching it go home. So the question changed. It wasn't just where it came from, but what waits for it in the dark. And will it come back? The truth is, we may never know, because the deeper it moves into the void, the harder it is to track, the weaker the signals become, until one day it'll vanish. Just like it appeared, back into the silence. But for now, as its light grows fainter, as the data thins, we're left with a chilling final thought. What kind of intelligence chooses the dark over the light? And what does it mean when that darkness calls something home? Now it's just a dim light, fading into the black. Atlas has passed the sun. Its path bends outward, into the cold. The flares have stopped. The heat spirals are gone. The signals, if they were ever signals at all, have gone silent. It moves now, like it never wanted to be seen. Behind it, the sky feels different, like something's missing, like we've just closed a door we weren't supposed to open, and now we're alone again, or maybe not. The world has gone quiet on the subject. The headlines have faded, the graphs have stopped updating, and the object itself, once the center of every telescope on Earth, is now just a speck drifting toward the edge of light. But the questions it left behind, they haven't gone anywhere. What was it? Where was it going? And why did it only reveal itself? When we looked, some believe it was just a visitor, an interstellar tourist passing through. Not hostile, not helpful, just watching. Others think it was something older, a probe, a machine, a remnant from a civilization we'll never know, or a version of ourselves that we forgot. A few say it was never meant for us, that we just happened to notice it too soon or too late. And then there are those who believe it's not the first, that Three-Eye Atlas is just one of many, a repeating cycle, a return, like a clock, ticking through space, waiting for someone to listen, long enough to hear the echo. The data is still being studied, the patterns reanalyzed, the golden spirals and silent bands debated behind closed doors. But no theory feels big enough now, because what we encountered was not just an object. It was an experience. It bent physics. It shifted light. It responded to us only when we paid attention. It moved when we blinked. And now, as it vanishes into deep space, it leaves behind the most haunting question of all. What watches the watchers? Because something out there waited until we had telescopes, waited until we had infrared, waited until we had curiosity, and only then did it flicker. Only then did it pulse. Only then did it show just enough, not to frighten, not to teach, but to remind that we are not the only ones who look up. Think about it. What if the first message from beyond didn't come in a language, didn't come in a voice, didn't arrive in a ship? What if it came as a whisper in the numbers, a pause in the heat, a silence in the static? What if the first message was a mirror? There's something unnerving about how it all ended. No grand finale, no bright explosion, just drift. No sign of departure, no trace of design, just an empty stretch of stars and one missing point of light. But maybe that's the point. Maybe it was never meant to answer us. Maybe it was meant to awaken us, to remind us that in a universe full of patterns, there are still mysteries. And in a sky full of stars, there are still eyes looking back. The scientists still meet, not publicly, not in press releases, but in hushed meetings, exchanging theories they can't prove, sharing files too strange to publish. Because deep down they know we saw something we weren't supposed to see, or maybe something we were always meant to. A few believe it will return, not in decades, not in centuries, but in cycles, that it's part of a larger system, a circuit that spans galaxies, a path that passes by worlds, just long enough to test their awareness, just long enough to ask, are you ready yet? Others say it already has returned, not as a light in the sky, but as an idea in our dreams, in our myths, in the feeling that we are not alone, and never were. Maybe Three-Eye Atlas is here now, in our stories, in the math we suddenly understand, in the questions we can't stop asking, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once you wonder, you can't go back, and once something watches you, you begin to watch everything differently. So here we are, left behind, left with data, with fragments, with spirals and tones and heat that shouldn't exist, but also left with something more, an ache, a knowing, a sense that something greater passed by us in the night and left the door slightly open. What's out there? What else is watching? And when the next object appears, quiet, cold, and drifting toward the sun, will we look again? Will we know what it really is? Will it know we've changed? Because maybe that's the truth it left us. Not an answer, not a warning, just a space, a silence, to see what we would do with it. And somewhere, far beyond our reach, that speck of light continues on, moving into the cold, into the place where stars are few and watchers are many. And maybe, just maybe, as we sit here, wondering what it was, it's wondering what we might become.